episode of Spectator Sports. I'm Sebastian Fonseca, and before we get started, please like and subscribe. It takes 2 seconds to do so, and it makes a massive difference in the algorithm, so I greatly appreciate it. This episode's going to go into the conference finals in the NBA playoffs and the EPL wind down, as it was a crazy last match day last Sunday, and I'm going to preview the Champions League final between Liverpool and Real Madrid. The conference finals are now underway. Each conference has played 4 games apiece, with Miami and Boston tied 2 games apiece, with Game 5 tomorrow in Miami. And it's been quite a interesting series, impacted by injuries and wild swings. I mean, each game has kind of had its own identity, and we're going to break that down. So in Game 1, the Celtics, just coming off a Game 7 rout over the Milwaukee Bucks 2 days ago, they started off really strong with Jason Tatum getting pretty much anything he wanted, even though they were tough baskets. The Celtics started off really strong and had a pretty healthy lead in the first half of Game 1. But then, I don't know what Coach Spo said to his team, but whatever he did something right, because Miami came out with a haymaker of a punch in the third quarter, and they started off on a 22-2 run, and it was pretty much over from there. Jimmy Butler led the way with the 40-piece. He got some help with some other of his teammates as well, but also Jason Tatum really struggled in that second half. And what I've seen recently in the times that he struggled with when he has to become the primary ball handler, a lot of defenses can find a way to really pick at him, where he's good at handling the ball in limited situations in the half-court offense, but when he's tasked to draw the ball all the way up from the inbound line, that's when it gets a little bit tricky. And the thing was, in Game 1, the Celtics were missing their star defensive point guard, Marcus Smart, and his presence was really well missed in that game. They missed him on the defensive end. There were a lot of missed assignments from his substitute, Derek White. And just his intensity, he's definitely the unsung leader of the team, very similar to what Draymond brings to the Golden State Warriors. And like I said, his presence was missed. And despite a mini run in the fourth quarter, thanks to Jaylen Brown, Miami was able to hold on to take a 1-0 series lead. And then in Game 2, the Celtics this time got some really key cogs back into their machine. Al Horford, who missed Game 1 due to COVID protocols, returned, and Marcus Smart made an appearance as well. He got the start, and in the first half, he didn't do a lot offensively. He actually struggled from the field, shooting 2 of 11, but in the third quarter, he really got going, and he finished with 22 points, and again, setting the tone. He helped bring up the ball, which was kind of a problem in Game 1, and kind of took a lot of pressure off of Jason Tatum. And they just came out firing from the jump, and the game was over by halftime. They had a lead of at least 25 points in some way through the second quarter, and the game kind of got a little bit close in that third quarter, thanks to Jimmy Butler scoring a little bit of a flurry of points towards that quarter, but again, it was nowhere near enough, and the series was tied 1-1 heading to Boston. And it definitely shows that a lot of people were thinking that now, with Boston being fully healthy, can Miami really compete in a series against a fully healthy Boston team? I mean, they were missing Kyle Lowry. They weren't sure when they would get him back, and it was really a question mark, because now with the series heading up to Boston, they have home court advantage at that point in time. However, Miami's responded really strongly in Game 3. Similarly, like the Celtics started off in Game 2, Miami this time was able to come out with a strong haymaker punch, and they took an early first quarter lead and even held a 20-point lead in the first quarter. The big thing is that I noticed is Bam Adebayo took a huge aggressive charge, offensively particularly. We all know how talented he is defensively. He's a key cog in Miami's back line, especially. He's a rim protector. He can switch and guard players out on the perimeter, but his offensive presence is really much necessary. And they suffered definitely some mishaps along the way. Unfortunately, Jimmy Butler missed the second half of Game 3 due to knee inflammation, an injury that has bothered him in this postseason run, but he's been able to fight through it. But another key addition back to Miami was Kyle Lowry. He is the engine or the shot creator for the Miami Heat, as he's the point guard that sets everything up or orchestrates the offense. He's a really talented defensive point guard in terms of drawing charges. He routinely leads the league in charges taken. With him coming back from that hamstring injury for the first time since Game 4 of the conference semifinals against the Philadelphia 76ers, it proved big dividends. His presence was known and felt. He scored 11 points, which is not the biggest scoring output, but like I said, his presence with him orchestrating the offense and really taking a precedent on the defensive end really proved to be some problems for Boston. Like I said, they started off really strong, and in this third quarter, every time Boston tried to get a run going, it was kind of thwarted by defensive plays made by either Bam Adebayo or even Victor Oladipo. Jalen, who did score 40 points in that game, and actually he shot 100% in terms of field goal percentage from 2-point range. It's actually being dubbed as the worst 40-point game in playoff history, which I think has a little bit of weight because of the amount of turnovers that he had. It just felt like every time Boston made a run, Jaylen Brown would give up the ball in some very poor turnover. And sometimes he was guarded by Victor Oladipo, who, hats off to him. I mean, he's come off some really catastrophic injuries with the quadriceps tendon rupture at the stint in Indiana. He missed some time last year to get another operation done on that leg. But he seems to be quite a serviceable bench player as of now, and I hope he gets some money in this offseason, whether it's with Miami or some other team. He's always been capable of being a very good defender. He's made a defensive team back in 2018, and he's a former two-time All-Star as well. So hats off to him. I need to give him a little shout out. But getting back into Game 3, again, the presence of him, Kyle Lowry, and Bam Adebayo's aggression really paid huge dividends for Miami. They had a little bit of a scare in that fourth quarter, but they managed to hang on to win the game by 6 points. A key thing in that game was, again, a really strange output from Jason Tatum, where people have been dubbing him as the superstar or on the brink of becoming a superstar. I would say maybe it's more of the latter, in my opinion, just because, yes, he's shown flashes of that superstar prowess or capability, but let's just say, like, every 4 out of every 5 games, the 5th game he's going to end up putting a dud, which is, I mean, yes, he's incredibly young and a very talented player, so he's quote unquote owed a bad game every now and then, which is fine, but it is in some very inopportune times for the Celtics, given that he needs to be really handling that scoring load for them. And it wasn't a good output for him in Game 3, but he did respond pretty well in Game 4. And that was when Miami started off totally flat. People may credit Boston playing good defense, but I watched the first quarter and even the second quarter pretty closely, and it was just Miami was missing shots and playing very poor defense. I mean, Boston had a huge free throw disparity, and that isn't just because of cheap or soft fouls that Miami was getting called for. It was just because their men were getting beat right off the dribble, and they had really no choice but to foul. Max Strus actually had 0 points, no contributions whatsoever. I think he maybe had a couple fouls or anything, but he was totally invisible from the stat sheet as well. So his presence wasn't really known. He had a really good game 3, but it had no impact in game 4. And the starters for Miami, that was truly appalling. To start off the game, the Miami Heat were down 12-1, and then it became like 18-1. It took about 7 game time minutes for them to even make a field goal, which was truly pathetic. Missing shots in the lane, every which way, it just wasn't their night. And it just kind of was like, they felt like they got what they needed, which I do understand in the broader spectrum of things. Like when you're tied 1-1, you gave up a game on your home court, so you have to fish out a game on the road side of the series, where they already did in game 3. But you want to maintain control in that series and show that you can impose your will. However, it just didn't feel like that. It came out flat, which is disappointing. Jimmy struggled from the field. He was just a measly 3 out of 14 shooting. And this game was pretty much over from the second quarter. And again, the largest leads each of these teams have held in each one of these games have been truly ugly. And there's a stat going around on NBA Twitter where we haven't had a close game, if you want to say, that came into clutch minutes for at least since game 5 between the Boston Celtics and the Milwaukee Bucks. So that's about 2 straight weeks of NBA routes or non-competitive basketball, which, I mean, yeah, it's not the best for TV. I honestly can get a big jump on making notes or getting a chance to at least record when the game is a total rout, which is nice, but I do want to be entertained. But now the series is tied 2-2. The series is heading back to Miami for a very pivotal game 5, where in about 80% of those matchups where teams are tied 2-2, the winner of game 5 ends up winning the series. In recent trends, actually, it's been kind of the opposite effect. I can remember earlier in this postseason, the Bucks were up 3-2 after taking a game 5 victory. They ended up losing the series. I remember last year when the Mavs were going into LA against the Clippers, they took a 3-2 series lead. They ended up blowing the last 2 games. So yeah, the trends are there, absolutely, but it doesn't obviously guarantee victory by any means. So both teams have a lot of work to do. The thing is, Boston coming off a loss, especially in this postseason, they're undefeated, 5-0. Coming off a loss. After the Celtics lose, and they've lost badly a few times in this postseason, that response is like no other. Either they're making a bunch of threes, or they are playing tenacious defense, smothering defense, and that's kind of translated to them being undefeated after a loss. And they haven't lost back-to-back games. Even they haven't lost back-to-back games for quite some time, even dating back to the regular season. So I would still favor Miami, given that they have home court and they even in the whole series. The thing is, they need to win 2 games, and they have the benefit of having 2 games on their home court. So my pick for Miami in 7 is still very much alive, and I'm still going to remain pat on that. So we gotta wait and see, but it's gonna be really exciting to see how this series really winds up. Transitioning to the Western Conference now, the Mavs have just defeated the Golden State Warriors to stave off elimination, and now the series goes back to San Francisco 3-1 in the Warriors' favor right now. In game 1, the Mavs were definitely tired, coming off a pretty emotional Game 7 victory on the road in Phoenix, and they only really had 1 day of rest, a lot of travel in between that. You can kind of figure those teams that have the longer series, they're going to be flat, their legs are not really under them. They probably have to travel to the venue as well, so they're going to come out flat, and you can kind of write that game 1 off to the other team's favor. I can remember this for numerous series before. So the Warriors were definitely the favorite team into this series, and they really showed that in Game 1. Smothering Luka, particularly, he had a very poor offensive showing. Only finished 6 out of 17 or 6 out of 18 field goals, and he had more turnovers than field goals made, which is just not going to get the job done. He didn't get a lot of help either from his teammates, and it was pretty much over midway through the third quarter. At least there wasn't really a game from that, which is fine. Sometimes, you just don't really have it where it is a postseason matchup, it is a playoff series, so it takes four victories to get knocked out. So it's not the death blow, it's not ideal, but considering the circumstances, it was also kind of inevitable. In Game 2, they definitely came out with a bigger sense of urgency, the Mavericks did. They even had a 19-point lead in the second quarter. Luka had it going offensively. The Mavs as a whole had a really nice offensive showing, even scoring 40 points on a very good Warriors team defensive-wise. I mean, they have so many defenders, capable defenders. Klay Thompson, mainly Draymond Green. They have Andrew Wiggins, another very capable wing defender. Those three guys, it's not easy to get by and get to the basket, or get some space to get an adequate jump shot off. But hats off to the Mavericks, at least for that first half, because the second half was all Warriors, and it was kind of like a game of two halves where one team had beaten the brakes off another in one half, and then the other team did it in the other half. And what came down to it was really like who beat the brakes off the other more, and it turned out to be the Warriors. In quarter number 3, the Mavericks only scored 13 points, and that was completely the opposite of their first half output. Meanwhile, the Warriors put on a show of their own. They were making threes. Steph was dancing on people, getting to the basket and making step-back threes at will. And the Mavs got really lackadaisical on offense. They really just settled for outside shots, and that's just not going to get the job done. The Mavs are actually the larger team or the bigger team in this playoff matchup, but they're getting destroyed on the glass. And you can say some of it has become, long rebounds with the amount of three-pointers taken, which is valid. But given the fact that your team is the larger team, at least on paper, you should be making that rebound disparity a little bit closer. And that's the problem. They couldn't close out defensive possessions. You can do everything right. The team can have a broken offensive possession, or you're forced to force them to jack up a terrible shot in desperation. But if they get the offensive rebound, you have more time coming off the shot clock. You have to reset defensively. And sometimes, it's just a simple putback, which is pretty demoralizing when you put in 24 seconds of great defense or so, and it's all for naught because they still scored. So the Mavericks unfortunately fell to an 0-2 deficit, and the series headed back to Dallas. And teams down 0-2. It hasn't been a guarantee, just like the 3-2 series lead. In fact, again, in recent trends, 2-0 deficits have been blown quite often, actually, at least within the last two postseasons. So it's no guarantees, but with the Mavericks coming home, they started off with the Mavericks having home court advantage for games 3 and 4. They played a little bit better, at least from a defensive standpoint. They limited Golden State to fewer opportunities, but the problem was it was really just Luka and Jalen Brunson and Spencer Dinwiddie, the three-headed guard monster. Shooters like Reggie Bullock or Dorian Finney-Smith or even Maxi Kleber have been no-shows in this series, even especially in Game 3. The graphic here is just going to explain what really their output was. The three-headed guard monster did pretty much most of the work, and that was it. Nobody else really contributed to this group assignment, for lack of a better phrase. But And that really proved to be the difference. I mean, they lost by single digits, and if they just got a little bit more from any one of those guys, I want to say especially probably Reggie Bullock, unfortunately. I mean, the poor guy went 0 for 10, 0 for 7 from the field and from 3-point range, respectively. So that's just not going to get the job done whatsoever. In Game 4, it was definitely the opposite effect. The Warriors didn't get the best shooting output from Steph. Clay has been off since the conference semifinals, but been adequate, I guess, for say, excluding Game 6 against the Memphis Grizzlies. I mean, we know Game 6 Clay is like no other. But excluding that, hasn't been quite the same player that he were accustomed to seeing, but he's been serviceable. Draymond, he's doing a little bit of everything, but he's never going to be a scoring threat. Jordan Poole has tailed off a little bit. But they got some surprising contributions from other players, particularly Jonathan Kuminga per se as well, where he had a great game individually. Just a very raw player, but he kept them in it because going into the fourth quarter, the Mavericks were up 99-70, and I was thinking, I'm going to set up my camera, probably get us early started recording, and probably get the chance to go to bed by midnight. No, that's unfortunately too good to be true. So here I am right now at midnight, 12:08, wonderful, recording right now, and that's only because the bench unit, this underutilized lineup, really put the Mavericks in a little bit of a pickle where they cut the deficit to 8 points as well. And it definitely struck a little bit of fear in Jason Kidd's eyes. He thought he could get a chance for Luka to get some rest because he's been beaten up, he's been getting fouled, he's been taking a beating left and right in this postseason run, and accumulation of hits, accumulation of minutes wears down on the body, that's for sure. So he wasn't too happy about bringing in some starters. Dorian Finney-Smith had to come back in, Jalen Brunson had to play extended minutes. And that adds up for sure. I know that Golden State was maybe going in for the kill because if they did sweep the Mavericks, they would have had a week plus off because the finals don't start until next Thursday, June 2nd. And Luka provided some very clutch plays, distributing the ball. He didn't shoot the best today, but he had his fingerprints all over the game in different matters. I wanted to give another shout out though to Warriors forward Andrew Wiggins in particular. He's gotten the rep, of course, back to his Timberwolf days as being maybe not a bust but an underachiever, and I feel like some of it is valid, but the Warriors really utilized the role that they've created for him really well. Coming out of Kansas, he played on a very talented team. Remember, he played with Joel Embiid in Kansas in his freshman year. Just really asked to defend and be a slasher and, make some jump shots. In Minnesota, he was asked to be, maybe the second best scoring option alongside Cat, and even before he was there, he was the primary scoring option, and that didn't really fit his game. He was a guy that was putting up pretty good numbers, but on a bad team, and they didn't do too much until Jimmy Butler got there, and then when he left, they imploded again. And the Warriors, I mean, these all go back in domino effects, right? Because Durant, when he decided to leave Golden State for the Brooklyn Nets, the Warriors didn't just let him walk for nothing. They got a sign-and trade agreement, and the Brooklyn Nets sent over D'Angelo Russell, if you remember, in the summer of 2019. And I mean, on paper, you thought, yeah, it's a pretty good fit. Klay Thompson is out. And D'Angelo Russell is a serviceable, just coming off an all-star appearance in 2019, would probably fit in pretty well with Steph. But I mean, the season was over from the jump. I mean, Steph suffered that wrist injury early on in 2019. Clay was already on the shelf. Draymond was banged up, and they decided to use D'Angelo Russell's contract, which was a pretty tradable contract, and they made that trade with the Minnesota Timberwolves. And lo and behold, you get Andrew Wiggins out of that, and a few other players and picks. And the crazy thing about that was, ever since then, Andrew Wiggins has really blossomed, especially in the last 2 years, and even this year especially. With the first half of the season, Klay Thompson was still out, coming back from now the Achilles and ACL injuries that he suffered the last 2 seasons. And he made the All-Star team as well. And we can say maybe it wasn't the most talented Western Conference, but still, he's an All-Star at the end of the day. And I have to give him credit. He's found his role. He knows what to do, and he's even grown as well. He's been a shooter. He's been utilizing his physical gifts as a defender. And I mean, again, we need to show this dunk that he had on Luka Doncic, because my God, I don't think I've seen such a violent dunk in a postseason game in quite some time. And it kind of falls along the 9-year anniversary of the Paul George dunk, if anybody remembers, on Birdman back in that classic 7-game series between the Indiana Pacers and the Miami Heat 9 years ago.
And defends, snaps it outside to Wiggins. Goes by Bullock. Oh! Drops the sledgehammer! But they're going to wipe it away.
They called an offensive foul. Wow.
Moving on to a crazy day of the Premier League, final match day, Sunday. And 2 teams had a chance to win the Premier League trophy. Manchester City was up a point, and all they had to do was win against Aston Villa, and the other team was Liverpool, and they needed a win and anything other than a Manchester City win to win the Premier League. And for Liverpool, it started off pretty rough. They gave up a goal in 3 minutes against Wolves, and it looked like City was in good fortune there. But unfortunately for City, they suffered a goal of their own against their opposition, and they went into halftime down 1-0. Meanwhile, Liverpool was able to tie, and so the way it stood at halftime was, yes, Manchester City would be up, or they'd be winning the Premier League trophy, but they would win it just based on goal differential. That's a tiebreaker in Premier League soccer. In the second half, things turned even worse, and they faced a 2-goal deficit. The problem was with Liverpool, they just couldn't find the net, and by the time they did, it was too little too late. Just in the 75th minute, it started off a goal swing for the ages to set up who would end up being the Premier League champion this year. And it started off with Ilkay Gundogan scoring a goal to cut the deficit to 2-1, and then 2 minutes later, Rodri scored, and they already got the draw that they needed. We felt like that would have been enough, but then just to be safe, Ilkay Gundogan took it into his own hands in the 80th minute, and that was the goal that sent home the trophy to Manchester City. And yes, Liverpool was able to pull off a victory of their own. I mean, Salah had a fantastic goal of his own. And the smile on his face thought, he had that Aguero-like moment. And I don't think the trolling of him is necessary or warranted. I mean, it's a nice effort for sure, but unfortunately it was to no avail. And it's been pure dominance for Manchester City. They've won 4 Premier League trophies in the past 5 years. Now, the thing is now that they need to do is translate that to the European level and win Champions League. For Liverpool, it means that the quadruple dream dies, unfortunately, but they can still get the treble. And now we're going to transition to the UEFA Champions League final. And the music, also wonderful. The anthem played, it just brings goosebumps to me every time. I've been watching the Champions League final closely for the last 2-3 years. Chelsea was the defending champions last year, defeating Manchester City. This matchup this year is actually a rematch of the 2018 UEFA Champions League final between the same two clubs. It was marred by controversy for Liverpool. They lost Salah midway through the first half due to very, tricky tackle by none other than Sergio Ramos, a notorious dirty player known across many circles in soccer. Suffered a dislocated shoulder and just could not continue on in that match. And unfortunately for Liverpool, they had two terrible goalie mishaps, and that led to them getting Alisson, who is now their Golden Glove goalie, one hell of a goalie that they've acquired, and he's been pretty much a brick wall for them, very dependable. Really has a strong head on his shoulder, knows how to leave his line and challenge strikers outside the box, whatever the case may be. And he's really anchored that defense since that. And the next year, Liverpool was able to win the Champions League themselves in 2019 against fellow English rivals Tottenham that year. Real Madrid has taken the most dramatic runs I can imagine as of late. In the last 3 knockout stage matches, they've faced deficit after deficit. In their round of 16 matchup, they faced PSG, a very talented squad. Down 0-2 in the second leg, Benzema himself had a hat trick. They move on to the next round, the quarterfinals. A late deficit after choking a 3-1 lead against Chelsea. They faced a 1-goal deficit, but then they scored 2 goals of their own, one to send it to extra time, and then Benzema scored another goal to win it in extra time. And then 2 goals in 2 minutes against Manchester City when it was pretty much all over, you thought. And here they are in another Champions League final, and one without Cristiano Ronaldo, mind you. It just goes to show how well a managed club they are. As much as I hate to say it, I'm not the biggest Real fan, but I know when to give credit when credit is due. And they have so much talent. Karim Benzema has been the go-to man, and they just have so much talent. And they're going to be a very tough matchup. They won La Liga quite comfortably, and they're healthy, given that, they didn't really have to really expend a lot of energy towards the end of the season, given that they already wrapped up La Liga. So they're rested, they're ready to go. Unfortunately for Liverpool, they've suffered some injuries along the way towards the end of the season. It seems that Thiago has picked up an injury and he's questionable to appear in the final. We'll see what his status is later in the week. Albeit, I'm picking Liverpool to win the Champions League trophy for the second time in 4 years. And that's it for this episode of Spectator Sports. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, like and subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you next time.